Hello, and welcome to Untapped Goldmines podcast, webinar series, video series, whatever you want to call it. This is CJ from UntappedGoldmines.com, and here today with me is Gary Wong from gswong.com. Gary and I go back to some Cynefin training together through Cognitive Edge. And since then, Gary and I have been involved in a lot of the same networks together. And I'm never, ever, ever disengaged when Gary speaks. Every single thing that Gary puts forward, my mind is completely entrenched in what he has to say. So thank you for being here, Gary.
Thank you for letting me be with you.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I'm really excited for all the listeners to hear about your experiences and the wisdom that you have to share. So I'm going to read out your bio for those who do not know you as of yet. I'm sure that it will be quite the pleasure to get to know you even more throughout this session. So as a professional engineer with an operations background, Gary enjoys working with business professionals and technically oriented clients. He's experienced in the fields of leadership training, strategic planning, process improvement, facilitation, appreciative inquiry, project management, change management, knowledge management, and organizational effectiveness. Gary is currently consulting in strategy development using a complexity-based approach and helping clients implement the discipline to execute their strategies. A keen area of interest is shaping safety culture in organizations. Gary is a Cynefin associate with Cognitive Edge and co-delivers the Cynefin Practitioner Foundations course. He's an advocate for the new view in safety and offers his complexity-based thinking on Safety Differently website, that's safetydifferently.com website, and wherever I reference a link, it will also be linked to in the comments where these videos and podcasts are shared, and on untappedgoldmines.com. Gary is also currently part of the special interest group for 6 Thinking Hats on 12manage.com. And as I said earlier, you can follow Gary and many of his musings, and there are a ton and they're amazing, at gswong.com. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you covered all the bases here quite well, CJ.
Okay, awesome. I think you've covered all the bases quite well. So can you share with me how you ended up on this journey? Because it's quite the diverse and robust journey. Really, it looks like a lot of organizational kind of development and leadership and sort of forward movement in complex areas. So how did you get involved in this? What's your storyline?
Well, my storyline really starts back when I graduated from university, joined BC Hydro at the time as an engineer in training, became a professional engineer in electrical engineering, found out that I really enjoyed working in engineering, but I found people more fascinating. So I quickly moved into operations here where I spent a bulk of my time. Ended up kind of moving up the ladder, getting into more strategic planning, fields like that. Then I kind of branched out on my own. Well, actually, before that, I joined Ernst & Young Consulting, got a bit of a bigger picture, a global picture of how things are going on. And then later kind of decided I think I want to go on my own, which I decided to do. And I thought by 2010, I had done enough, and I was going to wrap up my full-time consulting practice. But I got a phone call. It was actually a phone call to do an accident investigation. And okay, I figured my prior experience, knowledge about safety, I had enough. All I had to do was go down the traditional interviewing path, validate my pre-written recommendations, be a nice way to end my working career. But the turning point for me is that I had a colleague, and he introduced me to Cynefin, the Cynefin framework, Cognitive Edge, and complexity thinking. And that just blew me away. Not only that, I got exposed to the social science of anthropology and the field of ethnography. And in engineering, you just don't learn about those things at all. So this was kind of like a holy smokes. There's a whole new world out there I didn't know about. So I kind of switched from being an engineer to more of an ethnographer and listening to his workers tell their stories. And that allowed us to kind of like make a shift and deliver something which we've never delivered before. As a result of that, I ended up with my colleague creating and delivering sense-making workshops. We ended up writing a case study and presented to a conference here. I have other networks, as you shared some of them, and because I graduated from UBC Engineering, I'm an alumnus there. Also have an affiliation with the engineers and geoscientists of BC. And one thing I discovered is that complexity science isn't being taught to students as a subject. And I can understand why, because there's so much other stuff that these students need to learn. You got to pick and choose. So in my attempt to kind of like give back, to close the gap, I started to deliver Complexity 101 seminars at the Engineers and Geoscientists of British Columbia. I kind of expanded into an anthropo complexity series to cover more topics, and that allowed me to carry on here. No, I haven't retired, and I'm now delivering adaptive safety around the world. So it's been a fun ride.
Wow. That is yet again another stack of really incredible stuff. So for those who aren't really familiar with complexity science, how would you summarize it? As if that's possible. I hear the irony as I say that out loud, but if you could provide a summary of some sort, what might that be?
So a lot of the stuff I'm going to say, you can find it on my website. You can also go to the Cognitive Edge website as well.
Okay.
I give a lot of it to the training and education I got from Dave Snowden and Michael Cheveldave by discovering the Kinevin framework to make sense of complexity. And the basic of that is that they realize that there are three basic systems in the real world: order, complex, and chaos. Well, here I am going through basically most of my career with just the order system. I had one eye opened. And this whole venture into using the Kinevin framework and anthropology, realized I've got the other eye closed. So I opened that up there, and that it kind of like blew me into like, okay, what is complexity? How is it different? I could spend, like you said, all day, 10 hours with it. But all I think we want to recognize is that it's a different world. Where in the order system, it's a very predictable, stable world. A lot of if-then causal relationships. And it's a world that we love because it's very stable. We can get up in the morning and we don't have to think about how to get dressed. Just we have order. And we just kind of go out throughout the day. But then we realize there are times when, particularly today, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of confusion, a lot of unpredictability. That is that world of complex systems here. And because of that, we have to kind of like think differently. And our problem solving tools are then quite different as well.
Right. And so that, interestingly enough, I love that you said that, because it's been on my mind as of late, because I too am kind of following this world of complexity sciences. And I consider myself a new student to this, but what I am starting to realize right now is that not only are the traditional forms of solving problems no longer quite as effective, especially today, and I'll just call out the date of this recording. It is April 25th, 2020. And so the world is still experiencing and kind of going through, this pandemic that is COVID-19. But I'm also kind of starting to realize that I don't think even the change management tools that we have come to know are going to work the same anymore, because change is happening so rapidly that we can't do this linear, long drawn out kind of process anymore. It has to be very adaptive. Are there any other areas, or did you want to speak to anything around, the new world of problem solving and change management, and anything else that's definitely warranting change today?
Yeah, when I was at Ernst & Young Consulting, got pretty heavy into change management. And back then, it was the world of let's kind of like craft this idealistic future state, and we'll get the senior leaders to do that. And the whole idea, of course, is that sell it to the troops so they can buy in.
Right.
And then we would align, we'd have shared values here. We could build a linear roadmap. And I did a lot of that linear roadmap stuff. Then come back 6 months later, then ask everybody, how's it going? And then you kind of find out like, well, we couldn't do anything because the next day when we went back to the office here, you know, the crap hit the fan, we could sit here. And so I kind of looked at that going, wow, what's wrong with these people? Or what's wrong with me? Not realizing that maybe it's the methodology that we were using.
Right.
And if I can say it, you know, like we were getting really good at using a hammer and nailing nails. But now with this whole world of complexity, we're using this hammer because we're really good at it, but we're trying to nail screws. And it just doesn't work, right? So we do need different tools. We're finding out, and these tools have been around. I think what we're trying to do now is maybe cluster them a little bit better, but we've always had trial and error. We've always had to experiment and find out here. I mean, my family here, we used to own a produce store. And my mother, you know, how much I learned from her about when she put things out in the morning, like fruits and vegetables, things that said, well, how do you price these things, Mom or Dad? You're like, why do we have to turn these apples a certain way? Because they look better. And all they kind of says, well, at the end of the day, you tell me how many of those things are left there. And at the end of the day, they were all sold. But then we would try some other strange fruit, a Chinese fruit, for example. And at the end of the day, they would be still there. Nobody would buy them. So like, what is that telling us? Well, that's just an experiment. We're not going to put a whole pile of these things out. We'll put a few out just to see what people want to buy.
Right.
And if they don't buy it, not a big problem. We'll just put something else there. So we were doing trial and error a long time. Restaurants do this all the time. You know, the struggle they have is, what do people want to eat?
Right.
Right? They don't know, so they have to experiment. They have to change the menu. But in the order system, what we would be doing, you know, like we would have to build a business case for it. We'd have to kind of like build a huge plan, a 5-year plan, and say, well, if we were to convert the kitchen and do this in here, I think we can get an NPV of this. That would be the order system.
Right.
In this world of complexity, we kind of go, oh no, let's just put out a simple idea, add it to the end of the menu. Let's have our waiters talk about that. And let's just see if people want that or not. Or maybe they would tell us like, well, we don't like X, but if you did Y, we'd like that. Oh, how easy is that to do? You don't have to go and bugger up the kitchen to do that here.
Right.
But if it's a winner, you can go modify that. And if it's something people don't want, let it go. But honestly, as we're finding out because of timing, maybe 6 months later, he may want to introduce that because the timing is right.
Right.
And this is all about complexity here, right? It's like, why doesn't my idea work today? Well, because there isn't enough stuff around there to support it to make it happen here.
Right.
But a year later, it comes back. And this is why when people have these great ideas, I suggest them, don't throw them away, keep them around, because one day they will resurface. And when that opportunity comes, serendipity as we call it, then you'll be ready to kind of present that. I think this whole thing with the pandemic disease is allowing people to kind of bring these ideas that have been sitting there forward here, because now under the new normalcy, they may make a lot of sense.
Right. Right. And so I'm curious to know, when you say things may, be right or wrong today, but later down the road, it's a completely different, story. How do we reconcile that as businesses? Because you say, let's store the information and let's not forget about these ideas. We're moving at such a fast pace that sometimes we don't even remember that we kind of came up with that idea and tried it and it failed, or, we threw it out or whatever. So how do we kind of create that balance that those who really need order can go back to these ideas and say, okay, let's test it now, or let's iterate on it and make it different today, and try again. Like, how do we do that? Because I know that this fast pace is maybe putting us in a situation where we're just like doing and not stopping to think, but yet there is an amount of thinking required and really sense making, like you said, and complexity that allows for success to happen. So what do we do about, you know, reconciling the balance of order and disorder and chaos?
And let's use today as the example for that. I am a bit concerned and worried that a lot of the consulting firms are just bringing out the old methodologies. Okay, right. We have to get the senior leaders together here. They're going to have to craft this new vision here. Then we're going to have to give marching orders out to the people below to move towards where we want to go here. First of all, I think it's really unfair to the senior leaders, because they're just like us, totally clueless what this future is going to look like.
Right.
So the shift has to maybe start with them, or understand that, okay, our role isn't to create this thing here, but it's really to harness all the capability and capacity that we have down below here. So instead of directing from the top, they have to become central coordinators of a whole bunch of these little small teams out there, exploring different things that we can kind of do to help keep the organization healthy and alive. So that coordination too becomes information here. So you can actually go and create a whole bunch of these, and we're using the word entanglement. Some people may call them learning teams or empowered teams. We're using entangle because I think entangle captures this notion of messiness. And we have messiness in terms of, you know, vertical formal structures, but we have the informal networks. And in the informal networks, if you want to call them silos or cliques or whatever, it's fine. That's where the bodies of knowledge are contained. It's also where the chest of all these old ideas that never worked, that's where they reside. So in these small little teams go like, you know, I had this idea 5 years ago. Maybe we should bring it out here and give it a try. Let's explore. Let's set up a safety fail experiment and give it a try. And now the role of senior management leaders is to say, no, we have to do a business case, or we have to kind of prioritize. No, your idea is to allow these people to do it. So we're talking about distributed decision-making, centralized coordination here. Because you don't know what is going to work or what's not going to work here. So don't kind of like shrink it down and converge. Let it open here. But let's keep it small, containable. If we try some experiment here and it does go viral in a good way, fabulous. But if it goes viral in a bad way, a lot of unintended consequences, we got to keep it small so we can contain it and maybe even shut it down or oops, bad idea. Put that aside.
Right.
You don't know, and you got to keep on trying these things here. So that's the message that I'm trying to suggest to the senior leaders here. The thinking is different, and maybe let's start at the top, because people are still looking up at you as being the leaders here.
Right, because people do want direction, because we are predisposed as human beings to seek order and routine and kind of, you know, guidance, especially if we are not in that senior leadership position. So it sounds like, if I can summarize what you're saying, well, we would like to see today a world where our leaders are, you know, catalysts for enabling small experiments, leveraging the capabilities of the people that are running those experiments and empowering them to, you know, be safe in success and failure.
Safe to fail.
Right. And so when we think about, let's say, small scale experiments. I know that you and I are quite familiar with the concept of safe to fail experiments and running a portfolio of safe to fail experiments. And from my marketing background, that's just referred to as multivariate testing, right? Where we're testing different variables, maybe on the same thing. But how else can we run experiments safely in organizations today to kind of test where we need to go tomorrow? Given that, I mean, tomorrow might actually be very different than today as well. So how can we entertain this idea of safe to fail experiments right here, right now, and this new leadership role of catalyzing and enabling these small teams to do that? What would that look like?
Well, I think one of the things we got to realize is that maybe we're no longer in bounded organizations. But maybe that we're part of a bigger network. So some of that may require collaboration, maybe requires reaching out to another competitor. And the idea of co-opetition, kind of looking at, okay, what can we do to combine forces together here, share some of those kind of like things in the chest to kind of see if they make sense here. So now we're expanding it from looking at the individual organizations to maybe the industry.
Right.
And if we look at it from an industry point of view, perhaps there's a lot more things that we can do as opposed to just one by one here. So it's that whole idea of 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, but 1 + 1 equals more than 2. It could be 1,000, whatever. You don't know until you try it here. So that's again, maybe it's the sign to leadership saying, it's okay to go small team, go talk to those other guys that compete with us here. Share these ideas here, because that's how maybe we're all going to be able to get through this whole thing together here and maybe change the whole game of the industry.
Right. So we can see how that might be very useful today. Like we see HR, people and culture people in many organizations, especially in technology here in Vancouver, really working together to say, how do we as a community support people through these times and share in some of the messaging so that it's consistent and it feels as supportive as it can be, given that it's very volatile. So we see this happening in HR. What other areas of organizations could you foresee this being of tremendous value? Like you mentioned leadership. So are you proposing leaders of X organization combined with leaders of Y organization and A organization, et cetera, and kind of build up a think tank to sort of brave the new world together? Or are there other areas within the organization that we can see this happening? Or do we distribute? What does it look like?
I think the less structure you have, the better off you are. So again, it's the senior leadership desire that we must put order on there. Let's kind of create this consortium here. As soon as you do that, you kind of put what we call constraints on. And once you do that, you may put governing constraints, who gets to belong, who doesn't get to belong. You get into all that sort of things that we kind of do as humans. Maybe it's going to those small teams. You talk to anybody that you want to. If you go and want to talk to some video game guy because you know him, he's part of your informal network, go ahead, do that here. And Sally, if you want to go talk to this ice cream vendor, you go and do that as well here. So again, we're talking about diversity here.
Right.
And I think what we're shooting for too is not, we're not talking about taking and one idea over here, but we're talking about the term we call acceptation and just repurposing something that worked well over here and taking it going like, oh my God, I think we could apply that here, and vice versa here. Again, unless you kind of like get rid of those boundaries and just let people move all around here, you just don't know. So it's your classic kind of taste of the coffee shop, where you don't invite people to the coffee shop. You just let people come to the coffee shop, and let them mingle, let their ideas collide, and you kind of see what comes out of it here. That's the exciting part for me, is that we don't know what will come out of it, what will emerge.
Right. And this takes me back to some of our Cynefin foundations as well, where we talk about introducing that naive and that kind of oblique element to these experiments that we're running. So I think that's what I'm hearing from you, is that let's get really creative with this and see what can come out of this, because with blinders on, we're still probably quite likely to resort back to what we know. It's human nature, right? When we remove those blinders, we then tap into the unknown unknowns.
Yeah.
Right?
So let's talk a bit, because you are talking about untapped gold mines.
Yes.
Well, let's go there and kind of say, doesn't matter who you're talking with, we all have these untapped gold mines within ourselves.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about these. I'm going to draw from that what I have learned from anthropology.
Perfect.
Again, new stuff to me. And things I've learned is that we basically have 3 untapped gold mines in each of us. One is the fact that we are homo narrans, we are storytellers. Another one is that we're homo fabers, we are tool makers. And the third one is that we're homo ludens, we are game players.
So storytellers,
tool makers, and game players.
Can you elaborate on what those mean for the audience?
Okay. So homo narrans, we are natural storytellers. It's how knowledge has been passed down from generation to generation here. Just think about your own family, CJ, and how you pass down rituals about annual celebrations and maybe those secrets, that the auntie had or the uncle had, that gets passed down to you here. While at work, it's the master journeyman giving hints and tips to the young apprentice about the trade. This is what we call tacit knowledge. The stuff that isn't written down explicitly, but stored in people's head. And that's why it's an untapped gold mine. But it's also disconcerting, because that's the gold that can be lost when old salts retire, or people walk out the door either voluntarily or involuntarily. I can go on and on about stories and storytellers and narratives here. You and I have talked a bit about that. But let me move on to the second untapped gold mine, which I thought was really fascinating, homo faber, or tool makers here. There's a thing in archaeology called material engagement theory, which discusses how tools have actually triggered significant cognitive and physical changes in humans. So let's go back to the turn of the century, and we'll call it the age of technology. Some people call it the age of machines. And just look what tools did to us. Humans changed from village craftsmen and then ventured to cities to work in assembly lines. Because of that, humans were viewed as cogs of a machine now, because it was the age of machines. And because humans are not perfect machines, we do make errors, we were treated as error prone. That's how management perceived it here, because in order to keep the gears and everything else going for production and efficiency, darn those people, they keep on screwing up the works here, keep on breaking down here. That's what kind of started this whole paradigm about safety, which I do a lot of work in, as the absence of accidents and the focus on accidents and injuries and fatalities here. And this whole thing about we need zero. Why? Because we got to keep the machine running. Yeah. Well, eventually the age of information emerged, the next one. And what were the new tools for us then? Well, computers, communication devices here. And look how they have cognitively and physically changed us. Here we are, we're on the internet, on a podcast, using Zoom, right? The big one for me is artificial intelligence and what tools will be created for everyday users. I know for sure there's a lot of AI packed in my iPhone right now. It's like looking at what I do, the buttons I click and everything else here. It's kind of like storing that saying, oh, Gary is probably wanting to see that. If you're a big Netflix subscriber, how does Netflix kind of know that you may be interested in this?
Right.
So this is all, machine language, deep learning, AI, all those real cool words. Clearly, another huge untapped gold mine. But technology or tools are really agnostic, right? And it leads us to the third untapped gold mine, which is called Homo Ludens. We are game players. And it really raises the moral and ethical issues and how tools are being used by humans here.
Right.
What information is honestly being shared or deliberately being distorted here? So what are we hearing now? Fake news, rumors, imposter tweets. My head is swimming when I see something like, I don't know whether to believe this or not, because it looks so original, right? That's really good here. So how does that help us? Well, in complexity science, we're interested in the relationships and interactions between system agents. And agents can be human, but they can be machines. They can be events. They can be ideas. I mean, we're watching now how people are interacting with this idea of populism, for example. And we're kind of like having divisive camps. And I feel sorry for down south of us, or they've kind of divided into two camps. And like, why is it so divisive here? Well, again, that's the interaction of a human and an idea. Well, I think to look at the human-to-human interactions, because there are 6 games that we can play. These have been around for a long time, but this is where I kind of like, oh, this is how it kind of fits in now. The first one, of course, is win-lose. It's all about capitalism. It's the driver behind that, and it's businesses fighting to win customers. And that's probably maybe a healthy way to look at it. There's also a downside to that as well, because you can have employee reward systems, which sounds like a good idea, but when you think about it, you get one winner and everyone else is a loser. Yeah. What have you set up for yourself in that respect here, right? Okay, the other one is, of course, lose-win. And a lose-win is, I'm okay allowing you to win. Sounds kind of weird, but it's done a lot. My favorite example is my mother, or maybe you as a mother here. She was the last one to eat, the last to be at the dinner table. She's the one that's walking around saying, are you gonna have to eat? Everything else here. I see this all the time in big family dinners. It's the mothers and the aunts that are the last one, make sure all the men are sitting down and the kids are eating first. And they're all kind of giving in to make sure that the whole clan is having a good time here. But then you can look at the mother that constantly gives in to the child's demand. Why? To avoid a tantrum in the toy store or whatever. Why do they do that here? Well, that's because they're playing a lose-win. So lose-win isn't necessarily a bad game, because you can have a happy kind of like relationship. It sounds happy here, but the deep side about it is that somebody is losing because your mother or whatever isn't getting what they really want.
Right.
In the world of work,
conceding.
In the world of work, it's the consultant who acquiesces to a client's demand for a discount just to maintain the relationship. And then next thing you know, the next engagement here, the client is already kind of like penciled in, well, that's the lower rate. Isn't that your new rate? And if you continue to play that lose-win game here, you're wondering why you're working harder and you're getting less back for it here.
Right.
So maybe you got to think about, is it time for me to fire the client here? Or how do I get myself, I put myself in that situation here. How do I get myself out of it here?
Right.
That's lose-win. Then there's lose-lose. This is a bit scary because this is kind of like, I'm going down, so I might as well drag you down with me.
Right.
And there are some people that play that game. The one that I'm saying, again, because of the timing, it's the covert game moves such as not reporting bad news. Why? Because you don't want to be shot as the messenger here.
Right.
And I think we're seeing that played out now. Like, so why did China kind of like tell us immediately what was going on when they discovered, coronavirus and started? Well, now it's beginning to come out here. And again, I don't know what all the whole truth is, but it seems that there's a game that the Wuhan politicians are playing. And they were choosing secrecy in order to avoid a false public alarm and political embarrassment here.
Right.
So what does that cause now as the things unfold? Of course, some guys have lost their jobs, whatever, as officials. China as a country is in this embarrassing situation of trying to go like, now what do we do? And it's caused a whole bunch of other different actions come place of it. Lose, lose. Win-win is like what we want, which is the fourth one. It's the ideal of collaboration I like. So if you ever played the Storm the Wall game or done that exercise, there's no winning or losing. The whole idea is that everybody has to get over the wall, right? So I like those sort of games here because they are kind of collaboration games here. And one place where I've noticed that is in some of the exercises that my grandkids are playing. They're games of collaboration. So this isn't about participation or just win-lose here. This is everybody wins, right? And everybody gets over the line. That's what I do here. And I think that just encourages more positive sort of behaviors here. But then we get co-opetition, as I mentioned before. This is competing companies engaging in both cooperation and competition here. What's very interesting is that first thing that they do is that they establish probably some sort of moral and ethical rules, like how are we going to play together in here? And the best example for that, of course, are professional sports, right? You establish the rules of fair play, but you do compete for one cup. And yes, you know, in the NHL, which you and I love, and we're still waiting for the Canucks to win that cup, right? The Stanley Cup. It's kind of like one winner, everybody's a loser. But in the bigger picture here, everybody wins because then the whole NHL is healthy and you can grow from that. Then you have this really weird one, and it's just called win. I need to win, and I really don't care if you win or lose. I'll set my own moral and ethics to abide by. I don't really care what you play with here. I got my rules, and this is what I'm going to play. So we see a couple of really interesting things that come out of it. Narcissism comes out of it. Yellow one is hoarding. And we've seen that as well here. Okay, I'm going to take 5 big rolls of toilet paper.
Right.
I really don't care if you get it or not. I really don't care if you, I'm not taking the stuff away from you. I just need it for me. And that's all I care about is for me. That's where hoarding comes from as well. That's 5 of them. The last one, though, I leave is the best one. And it's called win-win or no deal. So it's actually the highest form. You start by thinking win-win, but understand the timing and conditions maybe aren't there really to have a win-win. So what you agree with the other partner, okay, there's no deal today, and we'll keep a healthy relationship going here. Again, it's all about the timing, and maybe the timing isn't quite right here. So you keep that relationship going here. There's no pressure to sign right now here, because if I force you to sign, that would be a lose-win.
Right.
I don't want you to feel that way here, so let's not sign. Let's carry on what we got here, and hopefully at the end we'll have a win-win or no deal. Okay, so those are the games people can play, and what influences them is context.
Right.
So context is a product of the systems or organization systems and how they are designed. Context creates the condition that enables success or failure to emerge.
Right. So a lot of what you've been saying, and especially with this context concept, brings me back to one of the mental models that I am a huge fan of, and it completely changed the way that I view the world and view all the human beings that I interact with, and that is the Ladder of Inference. We may be in the exact same negotiation for something, right? Or the same meeting, or the same decision-making, collaborative experience, whatever. And very much dependent on the context that is set or not set. You will have individuals who are part of the exact same thing come out with very different inferences of what, you know, is to come next. And that, I think, is the most pure form, you know, among many others, but it's definitely, to me, it's kind of risen above the rest in terms of, you know, anthro-complexity. Like this is many layers on the rung of complexity, because every single layer that you go up, or every single rung you go up on that ladder of inference, can change the next move. And again, two people can be a part of the exact same meeting and hear the exact same things, and every rung on the ladder, they start to interpret this and make decisions and, you know, conclusions and decisions, and build their action planning around their version of what they're seeing. And if we think about organizations and this desire to maybe move to a place where we're thinking at an industry or a network level, we've got all these pieces of anthro-complexity in here. How do we get to that place where we understand the context, we're all clear on what the objectives are, and we're working together to move forward? Is that even possible? Like, where do we go from here?
Well, I think what you've hit spot on is this whole thing about language and how important language is.
Yeah.
And one of the lessons I learned if I start working with a new client is get all the 3-letter acronyms out. Because one thing, I don't know them all, but I also find out very quickly that everybody has a different meaning of them in the company.
Absolutely.
So if we're going to talk about IRP, CRA, whatever and ever, ROI, it's kind of like, let's just maybe write this down on a parking list sheet so we all understand this.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to reduce uncertainty, build some clarity, just by having this list of, oh, this is what you mean by it.
Right.
It's a very smart thing. And it's a parking list because as you're going through a workshop, you keep adding to a list here because they keep on doing it here. And you understand why why are we using acronyms and these those are just shortcuts, right? These are our little heuristics that we use to quickly cut to the chase. And cut to the chase, I've just used that one.
Right.
You know, right? That is like, what do you mean by that? Okay,
right.
Cut to the chase, Barry. Well, I know what they mean. But for some other people, cut to the chase may not have the same, or they may not understand, where did cut to the chase come from?
Right. And I would even go as far as saying, beyond the language, beyond the inferences, we also have like these response mechanisms, these behaviors. So we can maybe understand the same word, the same definition of the same word. We maybe have very similar inferences, but how we behave, how we respond to those things, then again, we have another layer of difference, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I do like using the, the iceberg model for that, because we know above the waterline, the iceberg model are the behaviors.
Right.
We can observe them.
Right.
But where we want to go deeper is below the waterline. And we're looking at feelings and beliefs and internal values. It's also why, as Homo inerrans, it becomes very valuable, because that's where those narratives and stories are down there. And they also, because of stories, they capture the context around that kind of gives them meaning here. It also expresses their attitude towards things. And one of the things that we do in safety is that we kind of look at observations are kind of things in the past, like attitudes or lead. They haven't done it yet here, but because of their attitude, they probably have a tendency or propensity to behave a certain way. So what we're trying to do in safety is do what we call early detection. This is a characteristic of resilience here. How can we capture something early, like a failure, an accident, before it happens here? I'll sometimes use that thing about, okay, The narrative that we want to capture is that Star Wars thing. I got a bad feeling about this. We want to hear those stories, narratives early so we can do something about it before they become stories like here. I knew that was going to happen, or I wish I had known about it, because they're a little late then. We want to catch them while they're early. And that's how we use narrative in that respect here, is find out and use what we call the spidey sense of humans. We have a lot of really good mechanical sensors in the engineering machine world. I mean, if you look at a crane has a nice little gauge. It tells you when you're getting close to the red zone, which is overload, then you know you got to back off. All that we need to know is what's the parallel for that in humans? Where is the tipping point in humans? We don't really know. It's hidden, and it varies every day, every hour. We just don't know where it is. There's that aspect, and that's why we kind of like, maybe you have a watcher or a buddy, because you may not know that you're reaching a tipping point, but your buddy sees it and says, oh, Fred, you got to back off, Fred. Oh, thank you. Remind them and bring them back. But the other thing about sensors is, again, we have that ability to kind of see things that machines cannot do.
Right.
And that's why it's really important that I'm one of the people that say, okay, it's not about technology that allows processes and people to operate it, but it's humans augmented by the technology. I'm one of those firm believers that, okay, no matter how far AI goes, I don't think they'll catch up to humans. Why? Because we have this thing called the brain. And I think the fact that, again, if we think of the brain as this really good computer that could store and retrieve information here, we're hooped. We're not good. But if you see humans with a brain that can pattern match and recognize things, that's what we're really, really good at. And a good example is looking at the game of Go, which the computer now apparently can beat a human. Well, all we have to do is change the game, because that whole coding for Go to win is based on a certain set of rules. So what happens if you kind of sit there, oh, we're going to change one rule? The computer would just fail big time. And as humans, we can quickly adapt because we have that capacity. And then we can also go like, okay, add this rule here. Well, therefore, here's what I'm going to do. And we would beat the computer again.
Right. And so if we run a parallel to that by thinking about the computer program as the organization, because we've programmed our organizations to kind of follow this strategy, work towards these goals, aim for these KPIs. It's a program, right? Mm-hmm. This is the program we're running today.
It's a machine. Yep.
Yeah. And we have human beings executing the program. And we have human beings interacting with the program, potentially breaking pieces of the program. And you were alluding to the fact that we kind of need like that buddy system to recognize those weak signals if somebody's at risk of breaking the system, right? But we also want to be able to be very cognizant of, are we breaking it or are we making it better? Right? Are we in the place where we can actually make significant improvements here because of that narrative or that sort of experiential happenstance that's taking place between the interaction of agents that are involved in the situation? So I'm curious to know, if we look at it through that lens, we're experiencing all these parallels on a regular basis, and we have this opportunity to really impact the systems that we're in and the changes that are coming, but yet be very adaptive at the same time. What kinds of tools should we be thinking about today that can help us really detect, when and where we need to get the story, the narrative, how to make sense of these things, and what we do next with it. Because they're not simple. There's no simple answers to this question, but what kinds of tools can we use today that would be useful?
Yeah. A lot of focus has been on sense making.
Right.
I mean, the Connected framework is a sense making tool, right? We make sense of the real world of complexity in order to act on it. I think in the past couple of weeks, through some of the many webinars and seminars we've all been on, I'm beginning to now look at, besides sense making, there's sense breaking. And we may be looking at things that we didn't even realize were holding us back.
Right.
This is stuff of what you don't know is what you don't hear. So when I look at that previous conversation we had about, okay, the senior leadership team going out and saying, okay, go out there, entanglement teams, go and explore and come up with new normal, that's fine. But I'm wondering if we're still kind of in boundaries of some of the really strong sort of things that we put in place, such as the way that we look at finance, the way that we look at the economy here. This whole notion about, okay, once we get back normal here, we'll get back on the bandwagon and grow GDP.
Right.
All this good stuff here. Because there are a lot of other alternatives out there that we need to use to break sense. No, we cannot keep on doing unlimited growth. We've got to do, as Kate Roberts said, maybe look at the donut economy and realize there are ceilings here as well here. There's a whole field which I've been trying to study called evonomics, which is, again, really pushing back on the traditional classical way that we know economics here. And I remember the first Economics 101 course I took, the first graph that I saw was supply versus demand curve. And the whole idea was to optimize that point there, and you set your price there. And, I drank the whole soup, right? And that's what I was kind of believing. Right. Now I'm kind of like breaking sense and kind of going, well, wait a minute. Maybe that model was wrong to start. There's a different way we look at things. And I'm finding out there's a lot of other people, and thank God, for Google and everything else. You find out there's a lot of other people that share those same ideas.
Right.
So again, it's that opportunity to how do we kind of collect that and explore that as really breaking all the rules, not just some of the rules, but all the rules, right? And looking at things differently.
Yeah, you make a really great point because, at the start of this conversation, you brought up the fact that some of our problem-solving techniques just don't work anymore. And that brought me to change management techniques, which I don't think are really going to work anymore or in the same way. And there's a number of things I'm actually questioning formal education as it was, and the programs themselves, not necessarily education, but the actual programs themselves. They were built for yesterday. They're not built for tomorrow, right? Yes. And our tomorrow needs a different lens. And I think there's tremendous opportunity for us right now to take pause and ask some of these really, really tough questions, like, what aren't we talking about? What is rising in concern for us that, we just don't have a mechanism in place for it today? We don't have a response tool or technique for, but it is of concern to us. What areas of opportunity can we start to focus on that we didn't focus on before, right? Yeah. And there's so many other questions like that. And I love one of the big questions that I've learned from the Cognitive Edge group, and probably yourself, actually, because again, I'm entrenched in everything that you say when you say it, is, what else needs to be heard? What else needs to be heard today? Because we're all thinking about very different things today than we were yesterday.
Yeah, I think everything's on the table. And I mean, you talk about education here. That's a really good example here, because now our children are being basically taught remotely, virtual schools. And if you think about it, back in 2010 or 12, there were some cool technologies that came around, but then they lost some of the steam. One of them was this whole idea about online learning. That was really hot. 3D printers was really hot back then. But then they kind of lost a bit of steam, just didn't pick up any traction. Again, it's all about the timing. 3D printing, if you got one at home, it's been really valuable. My son in Detroit has one, and he showed me this site where these people are coming up with these amazing, really simple things that they're building here to help combat COVID-19. Amazing sort of stuff here.
Right.
And this is just spewing forth all these different ideas here. Well, this whole idea about online learning has come along as well. Great video, YouTube video that Sir Ken Robinson has put out, looking at how the whole formal education is built on the factory model. So you go back to the age of machines, the assembly line, and think about it. We take our children, we stick them in on a conveyor belt that goes from K to 12. We actually put them in little boxes called grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, whatever, okay? In the past, we used to find if there was a defect, we'd put them back in a box, we'd fail them. But now maybe we don't, we just put the defect in there and kind of ship it out at the end. And at the end, you get a certificate. All the sort of things, like, to me, are open for question. Like, how can we actually look at education differently now? Yep.
And I mean, we are gifted with time right now, which is probably one of the things that many of us have complained about the most, is there's not enough time in the day. I don't have time to connect with my people. I don't have time to think about that. Now we know we don't even have time to execute the same way that we used to, right? So we have that time. It is in front of us right now. So in closing for our wonderful session today, what else needs to be heard, or what else should we be thinking about right now while we have that time that can help us shape the future in ways that we maybe not even be thinking about today?
Yeah, okay. So I think one of the lessons we're learning from the pandemic and how governments are responding is this whole notion about how do you get people to change behavior. And we've seen things, and again, you talk about ladder of inference. There's another ladder I can look at in terms of how can we change behavior. You can nudge people, you can yank people, you can shove people, and you can smack people here. So what we suggest is that because of complexity and the fact that people are autonomous decision makers, they will choose what to do here. Yeah. We try to nudge. We kind of say, here's a choice that you've got. You decide, there's no pressure. You decide whether you want to do that or not. And hopefully there's enough moral, ethical sort of grounding that you go, does that make sense here? I will stay at home. And because we want to not just flatten the curve, we want to crush the curve. That's I'm hearing that.
Right.
But then, there are people going, well, no, we got to yank them a certain direction here. Maybe a financial incentive here. Or maybe we got to shove them this way because we'll penalize them. And this is now you get the idea of, okay, if you are congregating with more than 10 in a group, you could get fined, right? That's shoving people in a certain way here. Or the worst, well, not the worst, but now we're seeing full lockdown, which are laws which smack people there. Right. And you can see some of the people that have this idea of freedom, they were just resisting this thing, not understanding like what this whole thing about social distancing here against freedoms here. We're trying to keep you alive. Does that kind of help here? Okay. Yeah. So again, I think about what we need to be careful look at is just don't quickly go and start smacking the shovel people here, but how can we nudge people here? And I kind of like what we're doing, honestly, in Canada, British Columbia. I think most of us, there's always 1 or 2 percenters that are really observing.
Yeah.
Now we're beginning to see the results. We are flattening the curve here, so maybe we can go back and start reopening some things here.
Right.
So I'm very proud that, you know, we are kind of like being nudged and it's working. The other thing I think we want to do is we need to get away from this notion of always trying to measure things, measure outcomes here. The first thing you'll see that the leader that's in the order system, okay, not only will have an idealistic vision here, we're going to put in targets, KPIs, milestones. We're going to have people held accountable. All these words come out, and they're kind of like, I think all these words are up for debate now, you know, and it's kind of like
dangerous territory there, Gary.
It is. I mean, sense breaking, right? So we should be less about measuring outcomes and more on monitoring impacts here. And you know, our outcomes or attempts to collapse complex realities into simple measures, county ones essentially here. We also know too that if you set up quantitative targets, inevitably that leads to the home and Luden side of things. We will play games because we're good at it. Oh, you want zero harm as the target? I can give you that here. I just will let any of my workers leave headquarters today. They can't get hurt.
Right.
Wait a minute. Well, we don't, but I got you your zero harm target. So don't put people in these ridiculous positions here, right? What we need to do is that we just need to monitor how we can change some of these constraints or break some of these constraints, nudge them a bit through these safety fail experiments, and just observe how the patterns of the stories are changing here. And so I like to end with that famous thing we kind of say, what we want are more stories like this, fewer stories like that.
Oh, that's so fantastic. And I mean, wow, we just got to what I would say is like the really, really, really juicy stuff. I would love to, you know, explore more this idea of goals, KPIs, OKRs, measuring versus monitoring, because it does turn, I would say, decades old practices completely on its head.
Yeah.
And for good reason. Like we spoke about in the beginning, you know, you would come in as a consultant, and I had the exact same experience. Come in as a consultant or an advisor, say, here's the plan to execute in order to achieve the goals that you want. And then 6 months later, something didn't happen or some change occurred and it kind of blew up and it didn't work out the same way. And this is really, really common. And for those of us who tried really hard to establish and measure and track towards those KPIs, have come to know that it's not quite that simple. And yes, we can achieve some stuff along the way, but we might also have blinders on and lose opportunities as well. But the idea of nudging the system and monitoring for impact, I think it needs more conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, if there's one message I'll give to leadership is ask yourself the question, are you a mechanic or are you a gardener? Right? So as a mechanic, yes, you will have all those little KPIs, OKRs, all those things that we want to put in place here because you want to measure where you are here. But as a gardener here, you're actually going to basically have these little seeds and you don't know how fast they're going to grow. And some of them may turn into weeds, by the way. All that you can do is plant the garden, you know, nurture the garden here, provide the water, the seeds, the fertilizer to help them grow here. You're just going to monitor them, what you're going to do here. And you think about how you're going to grow your family. Are you a mechanic or are you a gardener? We don't know. And this is the fun thing about our kids. I had no idea how our three children are going to grow up there. I'm very happy how they have grown up, right?
Right.
Is there some guidance along the way? Yeah. But I was not measuring them as they go along, that's for sure. I was just monitoring how they're going, encouraging as they go, offer suggestions about maybe this is an alternative, nudging if you can, right? So then that's how if we're going to grow children, that's how we should also grow our organizations in the new normalcy.
Right. I love it. Leaders as catalysts, right? Um, and it kind of comes to mind for me as well, the concept of autocatalytic mutualism. Like, we're just here to catalyze an opportunity to have mutual beneficial outcome and impact, but we can't control it. We can't
No.
absolutely definitively predict it, but what we can do, like you said, is nurture it, and we can monitor, and we can do all the well-known, tested and true things that, you know, could work, with the caveat that something else, possibly even more beautiful, might come out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So we open ourselves to more, and we learn. So we really, I think, you know, the new era out of this is learning.
Yeah,
Right?
constant. Yeah,
Constant
and
learning.
constant learning here, knowing that, okay, you know, these flowers and plants, they're actually communicating with each other because they have a relationship.
Yeah.
And even the bugs that are there. I mean, some bugs are harmful, but some are very beneficial.
Yep.
So I'm not I'm not a green thumb gardener, but I know that some plants sit next plants prevent some bugs attacking that plant here. So again, all these relationships, interactions here, and you won't notice them if you're busy measuring, but you notice them if you're monitoring.
Right. Oh, that's so beautiful. Okay, so your statement that we, you know, what we're looking for is that nudge, that monitoring, and that, you know, measurable. I don't know if it's measurable, but I would say, you know, the concept of we want more like this and less like that is really coming from observation. It's not coming from force.
Right.
It's observation. And so when we think about even the experiments and the portfolio of experiments we were talking about as well, we're not doing those experiments to actually control the outcome of those experiments. We're doing it to monitor and learn and observe and identify what we want more of and what we want less of. That's it. And then we just continue the process. It's a continuous cycle of improvement.
Yeah, and in a complex adaptive system here, we are just trying to kind of like intervene, shape the relationships and the interactions that they make, not control them, because they will decide on their own what sort of relationships, interactions they want to go. They will form clusters where they're attracted to. That's very interesting. We need to observe, because that's where the bodies of knowledge are as well. How do we harness those things here, right? So this whole notion of splitting silos, I'm going, time out, let's think about that, because a silo is a body of knowledge. We, you know, physical silos on, you know, in our farms in Saskatchewan, they work. What they have at the very top, though, is a vent to allow the bad gases to escape. So our equivalent for that in the human world here is we just got to make sure the silos are communicating, you know. And if we allow them to make sure that they're communicating here, I'm okay with having a silo.
Right. Definitely leaves us a lot to think about. And like I said to you many times, I'm sure we could have numerous conversations and only scratch the surface of what could be and what value is out there. But I thank you so much for your time, Gary. As always, your wisdom is much appreciated. And for all of those who are listening, again, please go visit gswong.com. You'll find tons of resources, incredible musings, articles. The most recent one on the black elephant, fantastic, definitely eye-opening, and you introduce some depth of some of these concepts that we've been talking about today that, you know, we certainly can't capture all in one session on your blog posts. So again, gswong.com. I thank you so much for being here. Is there anything else that you want listeners to check out, listen to, watch, read, anything like that before we sign off?
No, I think you covered it all. And I just want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some time with you.
Oh, you're welcome. I thank you very much. This is absolutely fantastic. I will post this and all the links again, as we referenced today, on untappedgoldmines.com under recent releases. Just look for Gary S. Wong, and I will see you all in the comments. Thank you so much again for being a captive audience.